Peace and blessings, and welcome back to the pathway to the holy city of Zion. Today's reading will be coming from the book of Remembrance of Melchizedek, the covenant tablet of Shabuah, chapter 3. An account of the Eerkodeshiy's view of the process of creation, the two pathways in the process of becoming, and the functions of the four spirits of life, and the beginning of the choices of the watchers in the first great 70. Chapter 3. And it came to pass that after all of the marvelous light and understanding already received, we were all deeply moved at the blessings of the Lord, that he would see fit to reveal these wonders to us through Urim. And it came to pass that when we next took up Urim, amazingly, I found the vision started up right where it left off. And I saw Debariel leave to return to where she arose. And she was a column of light that came up out of the campfire. And when she moved, it sometimes appeared that she had the shape of a person. But she was a watcher of holiness, not a person. And as she left, she turned and said, I am the guardian of agency. And I immediately began to wonder what would happen next. As I looked, I found I was on a mountain. And casting my eyes about, I recognized the conditions of Olam in everything I saw. And I said to the Lord, O Lord, please show me what I might see so I can learn how to speak for the Eerkodeshiy, and so I can speak for them to all the peoples of the earth. And as I viewed this mountain, it began to dawn on me that because of the light of the angel, the Bariel, my eyes were open, and I was about to behold the Urim, a vision of the view of creation as seen by the Eerkodeshiy. And I was struck with wonder, because I did not know it could be known that a man could see creation through their eyes. And I realized that the greatest desire of my life was now opening up before me. For since childhood, I had desired more than anything else in life to find the ability and opportunity to be able to put into words the true grandeur and majesty of the love of a Melchizedek in creation that is continually presented there for all to see, if they had eyes to see it and a heart to feel. And now it was coming before me to behold. Oh my, all I can say is, may the Lord bless me to say it, and bless it to be able to be heard. And I know such things can only be ultimately taught by the Spirit of the Lord. And I held my breath and looked, and I see that I am standing on a great mountain, and the view before me is not what one would expect, either in what is seen or felt, because the mountain is just bare dirt, for as far as the eye can see, and because the feelings here of Olam are something no human has ever felt outside of seeing it in a vision from the Lord, I will try to explain it. And what I am seeing and feeling are the conditions of Olam. Reference number 16, Strong's Concordance, number 5769. And what I am seeing and feeling are the conditions of Olam. And the mountain is very high, with the summit a ways off to the north from me. And all I see is bare light-colored dirt, with many rocks scattered about. And the whole view before me feels alone and cut off in isolation and dull of feeling and listless. Yet all that I see is alive, but not vibrant with the gift of life. And there is the spirit of separation here, where nothing is joined to anything and loneliness abounds. And I suppose this view would feel terrible to someone, but it's not terrible or evil. It is simply the beginning of creation. Before all the wonderful things we see and know about our earth were formed, and the spirit of Melchizedek permeates everything in my sight, but nothing has enough life in it to know him. And what is here is void of any definition or anything to make it individually unique. So the mountain does not know it is a mountain, and it does not know it will become a very great mountain that will one day be in the heart of Eden. And the mountain does not know that the substance of its being is composed of the presence of Melchizedek, and it does not know that the shape of its being is formed by the man that Melchizedek became. There is so much happiness laying ahead for this mountain, and you will see that it will become a living soul, and the joys of life will utterly fill it to the full, and it will sing and praise the Lord for the life it will be given. And the wind will whistle over the top of it, and it will find the definition that it is a mountain, who is the body of the burden of God, and it shall see marvelous things and witness important acts of God, even some of the most pivotal doings of Enoki said, ever to be seen during the course of the earth. And I see that the earth is dry like powder, and it seems as though it has never been rained upon. And as I look, I can now see the dust swirling around, because the wind is now blowing upon the mountain. And with the wind comes rain and snow. And I can feel the spirit of the mountain begin to stir at the presence of the wind and rain. And it begins to have an awareness of itself. And it feels that it is not completely alone. And the water began to make little rivulets and passageways through the dust. And as the water continued to flow, the mountain began to have a shape that embraced the water with love. And it came to pass that I began to be aware that light was shining on the mountain, and the passageways of the water had shadows, and snow fell in abundance, and was a mantle of gentle beauty, and the sun melted the snow to cause an increase in the rivulets of water. And with these changes, the mountain grew in its interest to try to observe all that was taking place upon her and around and about below. And as I continued to look with interest, I saw grass beginning to grow beside the rivulets. And further down, there could be seen shrubs and plants springing up. And the further down the water ran, the larger the rivulets became, only to form streams of water. And far down the side of the mountain beside these streams, trees could be seen coming up, only to extend downward to become a forest. And the mountain became more and more aware, and the dullness began to dissipate, and the mountain began to have things it was interested in observing, and it began to have many questions. And there were sounds that became comforting to it, like sounds of the wind, and the gurgling of water, and the cries of the loons, and giant woodpeckers, and the eagles, and the thunder sounded and echoed, giving life to the canyons that ran down her sides. And the mountain began to wonder about things, and it began to ask many questions, and to have a desire to know. And one day it came to pass that the mountain was drawn to look far away into the distance, at the hills in the midst of the forest, and a little speck moving about caught her eye, and never had anything been so captivating as that which the mountain felt when looking upon this little speck. And the speck was our first father, Yasekad, who is Adam. And he was very young, and she could not take her eyes off of him. And she could hardly wait for the sun to rise to bring a new day, so that she could perhaps see him again. And many times she would discover him moving about, and she found that she could think of nothing else until she could discover him. And I was taken aback by what the mountain felt, when looking upon Yasakad, and it was not his size, he being so small in her view, nor was it something he was doing, but it was his shape that riveted her gaze, and was very noteworthy to the mountain, and he became all that she desired to see. And I do not think that the mountain knew why it was so drawn to him, but there he was, and all her attention was upon him, and the man became all she could think of. And she was always aware of all of his movements, and she watched for him every day with a sense of longing. And it came to pass that one day the mountain saw that Yasakad was closer than usual, and I wondered greatly at this, and I began to watch very intently. And I saw Yasakad make his way up the side of the mountain until he reached the timberline, and he gazed intently upon the mountain as he sat upon a rock to look about, and he made expressions of delight at the sight of her, and the mountain trembled inside at the sight of him, and she felt the presence of his beings very strongly up close, and she felt that accompanying him was a wonderful feeling, such as she had never felt before, and tranquility and peace entered into her spirit, and she was falling in love with Yasakad, and they both became fully attentive at encountering one another. And Yasakad felt her spirit by the power of the spirit of Mosa that was with him, and he wanted very much to share with her an inner part of his soul, and he spoke directly to her with both his words and his feelings. And notwithstanding his was a gentle and soft voice. It penetrated her soul to the very center, for she had never heard such words nor felt such feelings before. And yet it was like she had always known them. And Yasakad was falling in love with the mountain. Reference number 17. The feeling in this narrative remind us of the wedding supper of the Lamb with both the righteous and creation. The Eerkodeshiy fall in love with each of us, starting at our birth and childhood. Strong's Concordance number 2042, 2043. And Yasakad said, "My lovely one, you are a mountain, and you shall be a special companion to Melchizedek, who is the substance you are made of, and you shall be strong to come to his aid, to help him with his heavy burdens in the time of his need. And your name is Harari." Reference 18, Strong Concordance, number 2042 to 2043, Harari. And you shall be the foremost mountain upon the earth, to be inscribed first. And you will be given the gift of discerning the needs of Melchizedek that come from his enduring love for his children, as they become during the course of their agency. For many will lose sight of the proper use of the spirits of life he has put into all things, to use the elements of creation correctly. And I beheld the spirit of Mosa respond to the invitation of Shabuah and enter in to fill Harari. And he took with him the vision of Yasakad to dwell in her, together with the other two spirits of life. And immediately the mountain came fully to life, and she was transformed in her spirit, and she looked about with new eyes, and her eyes were blinking at the sudden intensity of the light, and it was as though she had never seen before, and her soul was utterly filled with the grandeur and the wonders of Eden, and a huge force of love erupted to flow out, and to cover the land of Eden with a mantle of purity, all coming from her strong spirit. And the mountain began to rejoice and to celebrate the life she had been given, and she was born again with the knowledge of what she meant to Melchizedek and to the man. And I was very moved at the sight of it. And it came to pass that the wind greeted Harari and said, I have heard from the trees that you are a mountain. You are so strong that no force of wind can affect you. And the wind, who was the first Eerkodeshiy to enter and to transform into Eden, began to tumble forward with news. And I can see mountains in the distance, seemingly without number, and the wind danced about and swirled around them with the news. And all the mountains received the news gladly, and they too were transformed from Olam into Eden, and they too were born again to have the gift of life as the news spread. And the gift of life came when Moses, the man who created them, together with the man who is the object of that creation, entered into to abide there to give them the gift of life. And thus, that first part of being born again was accomplished, and all the mountains of the earth became a significant force in Eden, and the garden of love grew. And because my whole soul was taken up with the viewing these events, I was startled to see Kava, who is Eve, making her way up the mountain. And I looked to see if Harari saw her, and she was looking intently at hers also. And she saw a gentle little person coming, dancing her way along and singing a wondrous song of joining. And the sound of it was like no other sound she had ever heard. And the beauty of the moment would never leave my eyes. And the mountain was fixed upon Kava, and Harari was amazed at how different this little person felt from the man. And a strong spirit of kinship awakened in the soul of Harari, and Harari embraced Kava fully, and the feelings of the dancing feet of Kava filled an empty place in her soul, and she could hardly contain herself, and she wanted to take Kava into her soul, and Harari was falling in love with Kava. And in the dance, Kava swayed to and fro, reaching upward with her hand to lay hold of this and bestow it upon that with her hand reaching downward. And Kava had been pausing to look at the far-reaching view of the creations of Melchizedek far below her. And it came to pass that Kava, our first mother, looked upon Harari, and they stood gazing upon one another for a while, and their eyes met, and their two hearts became one. And it came to pass that Kava saw the melting snow in the rivulets running down, and she said to Harari, I am a woman, because I am taken out of man, and you are also a woman who is taken out of the earth, and you are the life giver of all that is before you, to nourish them and to give them life with your living and lustral waters, because you joined them together in marvelous love. And Kava danced her way closer, and she reached up to lay hold of the waters, and she reached down to bestow it upon the grass and herbs of the field. And you are the source of my happiness, because your waters of Simcha called out to me and led me to find my Yasikad. And in this way you have joined me to life, and you are a very gracious and lovely, and I shall name you Rishoni. Reference number 19, Strong's Concordance, number 7224, Rishoni. Because you are my ancient ancestor, and have given me life and happiness. And Kava was falling in love with the mountain. And I beheld the spirit of Moses go to enter into Rishoni, together with the vision of Kava. And the soul of Rishoni sprang into a deeper fullness of life, because she now knew who loved her and who needed her love. And she had the indwelling spirit of joining all life into a community of loving kindness with mutual respect and support. And now I can see a mountain that is whole with a powerful spirit to love life and counsel any who would seek to understand the life they have been given. And Kavah loved Rishoni, but she did not at this time call her mother, because she had no concept of mother until she had given birth to the baby Kenan. And after she left Eden, she began to view Rishoni as her mother. And she said to her, I am the mother of all the living among men, and you are the mother of all the spirits of life of the earth. For Anoki said, and for me and Rishoni rejoice greatly, day and night. And thus the second part of being born again was accomplished, because now she knew what Anoki said meant to her. And it came to pass that Kavah in her old age, just before she departed from Nod, declared to Rishoni in her departing, and she said, I have come to know that the waters that erupt at the birth of a child are indeed like the water that flows down from you to give life and to sustain it. And your living water is like the milk of a mother. You are my ancient mother, in whom I take great delight. And our souls together shall be joined to all that accept the gift of life upon the earth. And her departing was hard for both of them. And how long creation was, Olam, is not known, because God has no time, and time came only when sin. And how long creation was Eden was certainly shorter in duration, albeit there was still no time, until our first parents sinned and left Eden behind. And with the emergence of sin, the conditions of bliss in Eden were changed, and Eden was transformed to become the temporal earth that we know. And we live, being surrounded by sin, and we also sin. And our being subject to time and the cycles of life and death only draw us closer to the source of our salvation. And it came to pass that I was so moved by that which I beheld with Urim that I wanted to see more, so I could grasp what the Eerkodeshiy felt and experienced in their process of creation. So I once again turned to the Urim for a closer look by seeing through the eyes of God. And I have been much moved upon by that which came before me with Urim, and I am directed by the Lord to make an account of it more fully. And my eyes began to see marvelous wonders of love, seemingly too all-encompassing to communicate, and my ears began to hear words of distinction, and my heart was filled with gratitude for the hope and assurance of the plan of creation by Anoki said. And I asked the Lord to take me back to view more of how the angels of heaven, even the Eerkodeshiy, viewed creation. Think of it. How did the grass and trees and rocks, the hills, rivers, clouds, and oceans experience creation? And what is their account of it? I had to know more. And it came to pass that I once again went before the Lord to look with Urim, and the Spirit of the Lord drew near, and he began to instruct me. And he said, all that can be seen was created by my hand, because I am the man that Anoki said became. And all that has been created was meant to have life, and life has been created for man by Anoki said and myself together. But take heed that you do not dismiss the role that man has played in creation. And do not think you know, but listen with care, seeking the Spirit, and you can be taught from on high. And do not think you know, but listen with care, seeking the Spirit, so you can be taught from on high. And the Lord continued, and he said, all the spirits of life now before you cannot know in of themselves who they are, nor what their purpose is. In order to know these things, they must first encounter both the man that created them together with the man and woman who are the object of their creation, or that is to say, those for whom they were created. And this is so that they may be instructed and awakened by the Spirit of both the man who created them and mankind for whom they are created. And the spirits of life in creation must feel with them and learn from them concerning the essence of their beings and how they may shed abroad the infinite and uncompromising love that they are made of. And for this reason, they will be a day of instruction. Reference number 20, Shabuah. And thus, each and every spirit of life in the created world must encounter mankind, both male and female, together with the presence of their Creator, who have been entrusted by Melchizedek with the task of knowing and defining all the spirits of life that are to be the home of man. And in this way, mankind, by the power of righteousness and salvation, can be a holy influence over the character of their worldly home. What loving father would deny his children having a say in what kind of a home they would spend their lives in? And after hearing this instruction, I found myself once again viewing the mountain, hoping that I could see more deeply the expression of the love of our Father and how it is to manifest itself in our world. And also, I hope to learn how we can assess and direct the use of that love to empower the righteous in these dark times at the end of days. And the vision continued, and the view of the mountain is once again before me, after her encounter with our first parents and the man, and she is rejoicing, and the view before my eyes will warm my heart forever. After Yasakad and Kaval left, Rishoni began to be filled with desires arising out of the love of Melchizedek that made her so because of the intervention of the agency of Mosa and our first parents. And Rishoni asked the snow if the snow knew who she was and what her task was, and inquired to see if the snow knew who her friends and family were. And she longed for our first parents to come again to instruct and love the snow. And Yasakad and Kava heard her longings and began to visit her often. And they told the snow that it was friends with the sun, and the warm winds and the snow learned it was a voice of invitation to purify oneself. And the rivulets called the snow mother. And I could see that the snow took delight in her many children. And she praised Melchizedek that her children were the living water, and they could be counted upon to be diligent in their provisions of life. And when the warm winds of summer came, there was much rejoicing to be heard, with the dripping and trickling water, and Rishoni was happy. And the rocks would laugh when the rivers tickled them, and the living water would bubble and gurgle along its way to give life. And the sounds of the streams awakening in the spring is one of the 24 conditions that brings the strong presence of Melchizedek even to this very day. And the sounds of it are the sounds of life. And the waters of the streams and rivers had a multitude of friends, and the moss and the periwinkles and the dipper birds are bonded with it with a bond of love that speaks of heaven. And one must be of a cold heart indeed who cannot feel it, to be nourished with the spirit of life that they can bring. And the living water was friend to everyone. And Mosa was the name given by our first parents to the man that Melchizedek became, because the essence of his being is precisely that of the living water. And it came to pass that I began to see that everything loved Yasakad and Kava, and all the spirits of life in creation looked upon them with abundant love, because they viewed them as the objects of their creation. And every person ever to be born upon the earth is looked upon in this same manner by them, whether their parents are righteous or wicked. And every tree we walk by sees us to be a child of Melchizedek, and their love for us is as expansive as the sunset is wide. And I saw that the Eerkodeshiy hover over us like a hen does its chicks, and they delight to surround us with overflowing love and adoration. And when we sleep, they embrace us like we were our loved ones. And when we awaken, they enfold us into the bosoms of their loving kindness. And all the winds and clouds love to follow us around, to be our delightful companions, giving us breath and showering us with their benevolence. And it came to pass that I saw that the trees would tell the wind where Yasakad and Kaval were, and chatter abroad what they were doing. And all the living souls in creation delighted in news of our first parents, and the hills would whisper, "They are at the river Simca," or the grass would quickly say, "Now they are with us eating berries." And it is well known by the watchers of holiness where each of one of us is and what we are doing. And the watchers of holiness are known as the angels of heaven, but we call them the Eerkodeshiy. Yeah, all the Eerkodeshiy are excited to hear the news of the doings of the children of Melchizedek, and the holy ones stand in awe of the objects of creation. And be it known that someday, when it is time to account for our use of agency, we will be saddened and embraced to know they loved us in this way, even while we were engaged in acts of disrepute. And I only hope that they can turn their faces away to limit the scope of their sorrows upon encountering the loved ones of Melchizedek doing such deeds. But again, think of what it will mean when we learn the truth of these things to discover just how much we are loved and cherished by the living souls in creation. What an unfathomable surprise lays in store for the unknowing in that day. What an indescribable day of happiness for us to be fully bonded to our lovely ones in creation, both in this life and when we are carried to the other side at our passing. And it came to pass that I heard a great sound of praising, and I wondered what it could be. And someone said, "Kayal, the fountain at Simca, has the news." And when I heard it, I knew why they were all rejoicing. For Melchizedek was marrying Yasakad and Kavad in their wedding, and with that most holy joining before all the hosts of heaven, Eden was come to the full. And every living spirit Melchizedek had created that had found their form to be a body for them to live and found a home in the elements of the earth. And Shabur had run its course in Eden, and now every soul there was complete, and now had all four spirits of life resident in their souls, and creation had itself become a living soul called the earth. And I saw a marvelous sight indeed, because my eyes were allowed to see that at the sight of their wedding, the Eerkodeshiy had it made known to them that they too were male and female, with the same holiness of God, meant for those made in his image to have. And the result was a great upwelling of love for one another, which spread among the Eerkodeshiy. And all those in creation embrace one another in a way they will not enjoy again until the end of days, when the arm of the Lord is revealed, and the righteous are gathered unto Zion. And I saw the very real truth that a holy wedding has the purpose by Melchizedek himself to be a special time for us to signal the Eerkodeshiy that we belong to them, and that they have the charge of our watch care, and they are to look to us for instruction each day how to apply their love for that day. And when the Eerkodeshiy find fornication, they become confused and cannot tell who to watch over or listen to, or who to protect and defend, causing fierce winds of sorrow to blow to the destruction of the wicked. And when the Eerkodeshiy see parents abandon their children, they only see Olam, and they walk away, leaving the unknown parents to their fate. And the Eerkodeshiy mourn greatly for the children, and droughts from the lack of living water are a result of their grief over children. So be aware of the central human value of the sanctity of marriage, and embrace it at all costs, for it binds you and your children to all the richness of the love of Melchizedek that is resident in creation, and you will be preserved and nourished and protected, and the angels of heaven will be standing by to take your part during your times of trouble, and the objects of creation were a never-ending source of praise and thankfulness, and all the Eerkodeshiy awoke to their holy duties as the sacred home for mankind by the example of the sanctity of marriage that was brought before their eyes by Melchizedek when he performed the wedding of our first parents. And seeing this, the Eerkodeshiy awoke to the rich companionship they had together in their sanctity of marriage. And all creation deeply loved their little ones, and they took delight in baby things. And the trees and herbs of the field loved the seeds of each other, and the wind was delighted to have the task of scattering them abroad. And in this very way, the love of Melchizedek prospered and was magnified greatly in the midst of the earth, and life filled the earth. And the dullness of the parents in Olam was done away by the life in Eden. And no father or mother in Eden would ever abandon their young. And now, when the power of love that Melchizedek chose to fill for us at the edge of eternity spilled out and flowed over, all of the concourse of heaven bore record of the loveliness of the Son of God, who the ancients called Motza the Lamb, and he is the living water. And the angel is going to speak again, and she is saying, there are four spirits of life that protect and safeguard and promulgate agency and salvation through righteousness. And by definition, righteousness is a right relationship between man and all the spirits of life in creation. And life in creation is one cohesive society consisting of Melchizedek, mankind, and the Eerkodeshiy. And we are seen by the Eerkodeshiy and by Melchizedek to be one family, and we are an integral part of a society that includes all the Eerkodeshiy. And I will list the 24 leaders here, for they are said to number 400 spirits of creation with 24 leaders, and I list them here in the order of their inscription, as it was known in Eden and all through ancient times. And the first three in each direction are called the Council of Elder. And in the east there are fountains, and fire, and thunder, and rain, and dew, and springtime. And in the south there are rocks, and mountains, and hills, and animals, and fruit, and summer. And in the west there is the wind, and trees, and rivers, and clouds, and grass, and autumn. And in the north there is the sun, and oceans, and stars, and the moon, and the holy calendar, and winter. And while we are a part of the larger society in creation, each of the Eerkodeshiy have their own societies. For example, all mountains are a society unto themselves, as are all the individual groups of Eerkodeshiy listed above. And the spirit of life that resides in a mountain is part of the spiritual association with all mountains, yet each mountain is an individual with its own unique calling and purpose as a mountain. And as human beings, we are the same way. And while we each one have a human spirit together with all humans, each of us is unique in the same way. And the immense love of Melchizedek has this effect of uniqueness on every single thing in creation. And because his love is the source of all of our spirits of life, both mankind and the Eerkodeshiy are all given dignity, each and every one in their own right. And that which sets mankind apart is that we are the only ones created in the image of God. And to add to that, our dignity encompasses being created perfect, and our natural self is like Melchizedek, our Father, and our natural self, rightly and by inheritance, belongs in Elder. And so, the first of the four spirits of life in us is the spirit of Melchizedek. And because we are the objects of creation, or that is to say, creation was made for us to be our home with Melchizedek, the first spirit of life and all the individual spirits of life in creation is that of the presence of Melchizedek. And the spirit of Moses is strong with us, and we choose him to be the second spirit of life in us. And he is there as the living water to continually give us life through our interaction together with him, which takes the form of reproval, repentance, and forgiveness. And the power of salvation in the living water flows naturally and efficiently through those three acts of companionship, both in him and us in all of our moments of life, to prepare us to return to live with our Father Anoki said in Elder. And the presence of Moses in us sustains the dignity of our natural goodness by his ability to forgive. And because we are the children of Melchizedek, and he created us, being a special gift given to him for specific and unique reasons, the third spirit of life in us is in fact that very vision of created purpose. And the fourth spirit of life in us is simply our being created as human beings with the instinct for survival and the tendency to seek dominion for the welfare of our families, and we are viewed this way by both the Decadachi and the Eerkodeshiy, as well as the host of those who have departed from our temporal world, who are called angels in the stations of heaven. And it is in this spirit of life in us that causes us to instinctively want to survive and live, whether we are good or evil. And when this fourth spirit of life is all that dwells in us, together with the spirit of Anoki said, because we have rejected the spirit of our own vision of created purpose, and also Moses the Lamb, if we then reject this fourth spirit, leaving only the spirit of Anoki said in us, then we feel compelled to take our own life and no longer strive to live and survive. And it is critical to understand that the four spirits of life in the Eerkodeshiy are different. In one important way, for the Eerkodeshiy have no vision of created purpose of their own, but they have ours together with the other three, these being the spirit of Anoki said, the spirit of Moses, and the spirit of our vision of created purpose. And whatever spirit they are, according to their individual definition in creation, whether it be a rock, a tree, a cloud, or a hill. And it is important to grasp the reality that your spirit lives in all the Eerkodeshiy, making it natural for them to love you and be well acquainted with you and to know why you were created. And for this reason, their expectations of you are ever a source of reproval that should not be dismissed. And bear in mind that the Decadachi have once and for all rejected and cast out our visions, and the spirit and presence of Moses, leaving only two spirits of life in them. And if you allow them to influence you to reject your own spirit of life, after you have rejected Moses, then you cannot be who you were created to be. And all of our becoming is defined by our interactions between these four spirits in us. And there are two expressions of agency, or that is to say, of this process of becoming. The first is the process of becoming through agency that is done by all the watchers of heaven, to include both the Eerkodeshiy and the Decadachi. And their process of becoming is such that because they have no vision of created purpose of their own, their agency can be fulfilled by sevening, and that is making a sure determination and repeating it 7 times. Reference number 21, Strong Concordance. number 7620, and number 7651. And after that, all the Dekardarchi and the Eerkodeshiy find their pathway permanently set, whether they have chosen for good or for ill. And the Eerkodeshiy choose good, and the Dekardarchi choose ill. And thus, evil is always evil, and retains its very nature through all the course of the earth. And good is always good, and remains its very nature throughout the course of the earth also. And all these determinations were accomplished during the first 7 generations of mankind. And because of this, the Erkadeshi now do not sin, but they abide the law of Melchizedek. And the Decadarchi will find no forgiveness and cannot be saved by any law or act or redemption. The acts of their 70 being the unforgivable sin, having completely rejected the spirit and presence of Motsa the Lamb, which is the only way back to Elda. But for mankind, because they have a spirit of life that belongs to them, it being their vision of created purpose, mankind only lose their agency by sin, and their vision of created purpose can only be infringed upon by agency in their acts of becoming. And mankind can act to 7 themselves by determining to do acts of holiness 7 times, to support, to build, and to nourish agency over and over throughout their lives. For example, my wife and I have 7 ourselves 8 times over in the sanctity of our marriage. So it is imperative when raising up children unto the Lord that we teach them and influence them to repeat holy behavior and commit to it over and over, even 7 times and more, to do it again through each and every phase of their lives. And if you do this so that holiness become their habit, you will firmly safeguard their visions of created purpose, and you will have the joy of seeing them return someday into the loving arms of their Heavenly Father. And if you see them 7 themselves with evil acts, your days will be filled with sorrow, and you can have little children by the time they are 7 years old who are good and gentle and caring and loving, who share like Motsa the Lamb, and they can begin to commit themselves and 7 themselves, and great will be your joy in heaven. And every phase in our becoming can be treated in this manner. And in our youth, and our marriages, and our parenting, and grandparenting, and all can be solidly reinforced and supported by our righteous acts of 70. And so, we find these 2 paths we can take in the course of our becoming. And the Lord is respectful of our choices, even when they burden him down heavenly. And he is so lovely that he still has no animosity, even for the wicked. And thus ended the words of the angel to me regarding the 4 spirits of life. And it came to pass that after seeing all these things, my eyes were opened to a marvelous truth that will add further to your understanding of how to join with the Lord in creation, and also to know how the Eerkodeshiy think and view you in their world. And after Kenah, who is Cain, killed his brother, and he and his wife Awan abandoned their people and all of the Eerkodeshiy, and in effect they returned to Olam in their hearts, for they surely had denied Motsa and cast him out of their hearts. And they certainly abandoned their visions of created purpose to cast away that spirit of life. So all that remained to them was the presence of Anoki said, an element of their bodies, and the spirit of their being in the image of God, with the urge for survival. And the Spirit said to me that Olam is hell for those who abandon the Lord, and after they have lived either in Eden or upon the earth. And the conditions of Olam became the definition of hell, with its loneliness and separation, when those conditions are chosen by the use of agency, and hell will be done away after the judgment, only to be replaced by the conditions of the abyss. And now, I must report that important knowledge has come to me while seeing the process of creation as viewed by the Eerkodeshiy. For while beholding the joyous response they displayed, and upon viewing the effects of the weddings of our first parents, I heard marvelous sounds erupting in Eden, and those sounds filled creation were the sounds of life and the joys of living. And the tongue cannot speak of it adequately. One must have ears to hear such sounds, and they are the laughter of children at play, or the tender whisper from a father to his child, or the gentle song that arises from the hearts of the thankful, and the sound of the waves of the sea, and the sounds of a gurgling brook, and the sounds of birds singing, or the song of a whistling toad sings to her babies, and all such sounds are the sounds of life. And while such sounds often pass by our notice for the Eerkodeshiy, they are central to their happiness and sense of well-being, and they are strongly motivated by these sounds in all their relationships together, and most importantly with us. It is so even though we are entirely unaware of what they are feeling and how they are responding because of sounds, and in Eden all sounds of life prospered and lay like a mantle of peace upon creation, and all creation is very sensitive to sound. And into this pleasant scene the devil came crashing into the trees of Eden, and he is a meteorite, and the loud explosive sound was frightening, and his landing tore into the hillside with sounds that shook the earth, and they were the sounds of death. And the meteorite started a fire, and it was a putrefied fire with crackling sounds that led one to the feelings of dismay. And the trees and hillside wanted to hide because of the sounds and run away from the violence. And the feelings that accompanied the noise were strange indeed in Eden. And our first mother screamed and fled in fear, which was the first fear felt in Eden, and the first sounds of death, issuing forth from the image of God. And she was expressing the feelings of all creation in the rocks of the river Simca saw that the meteorite felt separate and alone and very unclean. And the rocks cried out for someone to save them, and they asked for a redeemer to protect them. And this strange rock that intruded into their peaceful Eden, and their cries were the sounds of death, because they did not know that they already had a redeemer. And the rocks of Simca cried out, and the fountain wept for fear. And a voice from heaven said, "He calls himself Semihaza, but your name for him is bad." Reference 22, Strong's Concordance, number 905 and 907 for bad. Separation, apart without, alone by oneself, empty, idle talk. And he calls himself Semihaza, but your name for him is bad, because he is separated from life and apart from the truth. And he is joined to the sounds of death. And he will be the chief of the city of Senasio, which is a city founded upon the sounds of death. And all you Eerkodeshiy, beware of him, and take care of Yasakat and Kabah, who are your treasure. And do not allow the sounds of death to remain in their tender hearts. And it came to pass that Bad began to rebel against the definition of all the other rocks, and against womanhood. And Bad is the original name for the devil, and it was given to him by the Lord for the Eerkodeshiy. And bad is not the opposite of good. Bad is the opposite of purity. Bad is the definition of unclean. And bad is the description of separation and alienation. And it came to pass that all those among the watchers who chose to follow him became just like him, and were known as his angels, or that is to say, the Eerkodeshiy, and the 1/3 of the watchers of heaven followed to fall away with bad. And the voice of the Lord from heaven continued, and he said to the Eerkodeshiy, who were assembled in their sorrow, I will comfort you, for I am your Redeemer. The 12 among you, who are the council of elders, will be tasked to address the truth and to expose bad and his sounds of death. And you will be an important guide to use your voices to inform the righteous counsels of men regarding their course and their efforts to avoid those life conditions that give rise to the sounds of death. And you also will be the leaders of a city, even the dwelling place of a Melchizedek in the temporal world. And that city is called Mayin. Reference number 23, Zion. And thus were all the Eerkodeshiy given the very direct task of safeguarding the righteous from the sounds of death and multiplying the sounds of life. And there are 3 among you who will be stationed on your council in each direction, and they shall inform those on the council of the righteous among men. And when Melchizedek has a need to commission them to manage the sounds in creation for the righteous councils in the communities of Mayin, and this council shall abide during all the course of the earth, so we can count their names one by one and expect them to perform this task for us. So listen to this council of elders and expect them to be filled with reproof for making or allowing any sounds of death. And it came to pass that all the Eerkodeshiy were comforted, and those on the council wondered what their other duties were with the council of Mayin. And the Lord said, your other duties are virtue, and it is virtue that will safeguard the sounds of life. And the Eerkodeshiy said with one voice, what is virtue? And the Lord said, look and see. And all the Eerkodeshiy looked, and they beheld the time when Bad was chief of the city of Senusio, and he was not loyal, nor faithful to those in his city, but he fed off of their feelings that make lies, and he was nourished by their feelings of deception and cunning, and he was insidious, and he loved the feelings of the greed that motivates thieves, and it was delicious to him. And he was drawn to devour the feelings of hate like a meal, and lust was delightful for him, and killing was his goal in all things, because he hated the gift of life. And he is the enemy of purity, and Bad fed on these feelings wherever they were found, like a vulture upon a carcass. And like them, he cared nothing for their carcass, and cast it from him when he was finished. And upon hearing all this, I wondered why Bad would abandon the wicked and lose the ones he had with him after leading them astray. But Bad is void of loyalty toward anything. He only has attachments to use for those of his own ends, before he discards them utterly with no remorse. And many there will be among men who call him Father, and pattern their lives after him. And Bad fed on these feelings of evil wherever they are found. And he would go from one source of them to another, and he would up and leave the wicked, and leaving them lost and humiliated in a rage after leading them to their spiritual death. And Bad hovers over those among men who feel these things. So be careful to disassociate yourself from the sounds of death. And when thus the Eerkodeshiy viewed all these things, they knew what virtue is. And it was clear to them that virtue is to be faithful and loyal and honest and diligent, and to be harmless, and to accompany companions and strangers in their time of trouble. And they love the discipline it takes to avoid lust, and they would not pursue the satisfaction of possession, material things, nor would they seek to find dominance over their fellows, to oppress them. But they love freedom and the sanctity of agency, and ever sought to safeguard the gift of life in all things by issuing forth the sounds of life. And the Eerkodeshiy began to nourish and provide for Yasakat and Kavan for new and fresh determination in their hearts, by making the sounds of life fill their encampment. And they saw to it that they might not stumble or fall to be hurt, and thus they cried aloud. And they watched over them all during the course of their lives to see that they not feel anything to do with contention or confrontation, which could bring the sounds of death, because Melchizedek grieves at the sounds of death. And they fed our first parents with diligence, so no sign of hunger could be heard. And they brought to them delightful occasion of rest, and showed them beautiful things to see, so they could hear happy exclamations. And they exclaimed that they would see to it that each day would be greeted with delightful singing of songs of joy by the birds of the morning, and the softness of the birds singing in the evening. And all this spilled out virtue into Eden, and the sounds of life were magnified in Eden, and the sounds of life for the Eerkodeshiy became the foundation of the gift of life, and a strong signal of the presence of intelligence. And the sounds of death became the foundation of ignorance in the eyes of the Eerkodeshiy, and also depravity and laziness prospered with the lack of virtue in Senasio, and loud noise and raucous music flowed out of Senasio. And it was not music made out of instruments made of the Eerkodeshiy, but instruments made to please the Decadarchi, and the sounds of shouting and contention and weeping and sorrow and bickering born of fornication prospered in the world of Senasio, and accusations were their watchword. And thus the Eerkodeshiy declared that they would choose virtue, and the sounds of life were their gauge to determine their success. But the Decadarchi chose sin and corruption, and they took great delight in the sounds of death. And this was their signal of declaration to commitment in the first great 70. And the council of the Eerkodeshiy moved out in creation with a sure determination of good, and from that day on, they taught virtue with diligence and patience. And the righteous were not ever rude before God, the God of heaven, by making loud noises. And infants who are close to Melchizedek are afraid of loud noises because of this. And these things have followed down from one generation to another because of these teachings of the Eerkodeshiy. And there were times that the council of the Eerkodeshiy taught their fellows who were new and seasonal in the temporal world, and they would ask the righteous to help them teach, but they were distressed because the righteous did not as yet have the means to do so, for they needed the day of instruction. And I knew their remedy would come with the sevenfold covenant of Shabuah that would be established in the course of time by the hand of Melchizedek. And while the Eerkodeshiy tended to the watch care of the righteous, the Decadarchi hovered over Canaan, who is Cain, and Awan, because there was nowhere else that they could find the feelings which they sought to feed on. And be aware that when we have such feelings, the forces of evil, together with their selfish desires, seek us out like a vulture, and we become their carcasses to feed upon. So when Yasakat and Kavah left Eden, the Eerkodeshiy went gladly with them, because they were their loved ones, and the angels of heaven danced with delight to go before them into what was unknown for all of man. And the Eerkodeshiy went before them, scouting out the way, and they were unafraid. And they stayed around them day and night, and the hills had the pleasure to count their footsteps upon them. And they took note of the objects of the eternal love of Melchizedek passing by their way. And to this day, those hills know where the first steps of our first parents can be found, and they hold that the steps of the righteous are a holy place all during the course of the earth, and they seek to live there. But the Decadarchi were afraid to leave Eden, and it was they who were cast out. In the very moment the cedar tree became dark, and our ancient parents were not cast out. But Anoki said was sorrowful that our first parents had to leave Eden, and they had to leave because there were no restraints upon sin in Eden. And had they continued to dwell there, sin would have presided in paradise. And the Decadarchi viewed themselves as cursed unto death, and held that they were rejected, and it only viewed their desires to be strong in their wickedness. And the Decadarchi hated the restraints put upon them that they found in the temporal world for goodness and holiness and purity and love are spiritual qualities that must be sought after by man in the temporal world. And the Decadarchi will never seek after these qualities, but righteous mankind with their agency earnestly sought after them. And in Eden, the Decadarchi had the advantage in that the environment in it was such that all their actions were spiritual, and there was as yet nothing temporal, and no distinction known between sin and holiness. And so it was the Decadarchi who viewed themselves as having been cursed to death and cast out of Eden, and they felt rejected and completely bewildered with the onset of becoming temporal. And all of this trauma coming to them caused them to become embittered, and their bitterness was enlarged because they had a long wait for some human to use their agency to choose sin and thereby join with them to give them a place in the temporal world. And their ability to find a place in the temporal world came to them very slowly, because Yasakat and Kavar may never have sinned again in all their long lives. And the reason it is known that Kenah, who they called Cain, ruled over them is because of this horrible sin of murder, he being the only source of place for them. And finally, evil had something to feed on, and bad lusted after the feelings of shame. And by this time, all of us were very weary because of the intensity of the vision. So we ended looking with the Urim for a while and went about our daily task. That is the conclusion of the book of Remembrance of Melchizedek, chapter 3. Peace and blessings, and shalom.